what you do this week does matter. And I don't know about you, but I've had an amazing week. It started out here in Ottawa, but then it moved on to the big city of Barrie, Ontario. Anybody here from Barrie, Ontario? Yeah, sorry about that. It's a great place. I had the opportunity this week. I left on Wednesday morning and went to Barrie with a group of people from our church here, and we went to Connexus Church. And if you're fairly new to the church, you may not know this, but we were actually a partner church since the beginning of January with Connexus. Connexus is a fantastic church in the Barrie area. They have 3 different locations. Collectively, they're a church of roughly 1,800 people, and God is doing an amazing work there. And we're one of 5 churches across Canada, 3 of which are in Ontario, that are partnered with Connexus. And it was just an amazing experience to go this week. We left on Wednesday morning. We went in a big van. That was a lot of fun. It was way too hot in there with a bunch of musty dudes. And so we headed over there to the Connexus, and we spent Wednesday and Thursday in training and sessions with some of their staff where they just poured of themselves into us, and we downloaded as much info as we could possibly can, stole a whole bunch of ideas, learned a bunch of strategy along the way, and their investment in us is going to help us as a church go farther, faster, as we continue on with our mission and vision to build irresistible bridges between Jesus and people who are unchurched, people who used to believe, used to attend church, but for one reason or another walked away. Everything we do is with the intention of trying to reach those people and connect them to Jesus, and our partnership with Connexus is an invaluable part of that journey. And so I'm really excited, and it was fun to take, again, a group of leaders, 8 of them from this church, and to experience these last few days with them. We had a lot of fun. We did some spiritual things, but then we just did some ridiculous things, which I guess when you go to Barrie, you just have to fill the time. We went axe throwing. Anybody here ever done that, axe throwing? That is just, it's borderline violent, but it's a whole lot of fun. We had a great time doing that. I tried to get Alan to hold an apple when I threw one. He wasn't too keen on that, but I did get a bullseye, so I tried to tell him, man, I promise I won't miss. But anyways, it was a great thing. Had a fun time doing that. We did some virtual reality stuff, but more than anything, it was just great to be with some leaders from this church. At one point, on Friday, the whole idea or the whole point of the weekend began to shift for us. The first 2 days was us downloading and absorbing information, and the last 2 days was us serving the Connexus Church. And what happened was they hosted their own in-house volunteer conference. Across their 3 campuses, they have over 400 volunteers, and so they hosted them for 2 days. For all their campuses, volunteers came together, and so the partner churches and the teams that they brought and their staff served 400 people. And it was an amazing experience. Alan and I and 2 of our board members ended up in the parking lot, which was a good time. Here's Alan and Ethel and Susan, who are members of our advisory team. We moved from the platform and the boardroom to the parking lot, and we just welcomed people as they came into the parking lot and had a blast doing it. The good thing was they didn't know who we are, so we made fools of ourselves, and we had a great time doing it. We were sober and everything. It was just awesome. And so we were just, welcome everybody. It's so great to have you guys here, and the smiles on their faces, and I saw a value in how you welcome people. And to those of you that serve in our guest services team, I just want to say a big thank you to you. You're the unsung heroes of our church, and the way that you greet people and shake hands and offer smiles regardless of what may be going on in or with you, and you do it week after week, and you welcome people and make this a church that welcomes people, and I just want to thank you so much. It's great to see that, and we had a lot of fun. And then not just the 4 of us here, but we had another group. This was our group that was there, the 9 of us, and some of them are members of our advisory team, some of them are lay leaders, and then the rest of us are staff, and I won't point out who's who, but it was just a great, great time because we were literally just equals, and we just had a blast learning together, and I'm really excited. We had fun. You can see, I do have another picture of us here, the photo booth. This was a really good time. I don't know really what's funnier, Mike wearing a tie, or Alan just looks really creepy with that thing over his eyes. I had a really hard time, kept him at a distance, but anyways, it was a good time. I could go on and on and on about the week we had, but it could take me a whole week just to talk about the week we had, and because it just was so amazing. But we're going to continue on in our series today, Losing Our Marbles. You're losing yours, and I'm losing mine. And over the course of this series, we've been talking about time. We've been talking about the power of time. And because you and I only have but so much time, what we need, what you need, what I need more than anything else is wisdom. You and I need wisdom as we make decisions what to do with the time that we have left, specifically the time that we have left with our kids and with our teenagers. And I know throughout this series we've been talking about parenting and we've been talking to parents, but as I've been saying all throughout, this series is so much more than that. This series is for every single one of us, whether we're parents or not, whether our kids are grown or gone, whether you're empty nesters, regardless of what stage you're at in your life. This series is for all of us. This series is for anyone who's old enough and willing enough to make a difference, make an impact, leave an imprint on the heart and mind of a child. And so throughout this series, everything has fallen under one banner, under one umbrella. And it's a prayer that a man named Moses prayed in the Old Testament. Moses is a man who was the leader of a nation. He was a phenomenal leader. He was a pillar of the Old Testament and in the scriptures. And in the book of Psalms, as the leader of a nation, not as a parent, but as the leader of a nation, he prayed to God about time. And he prayed something powerful. And again, it served as the current or the theme or the banner for this entire series. He said, "Teach us to number our days." Moses prayed to God. "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." That God, if you would just help us, if you would teach us, teach me and teach my people to number our days, we would gain a heart of wisdom, the heart that you need as a parent, the heart that I need as a parent, the heart that you need as you're present in the lives of the next generation. And so to help you and to help me learn how to number our days, I suggested that every parent in the room get a jar much like one of these and to get some marbles. This jar specifically has 936 marbles in it. And the number 936 is significant because it's the estimated number of weeks between birth and high school graduation, which is sobering for those of us who have kids somewhere in that number. Right? The reality that we have somewhere between 0 and 936 weeks left with our kids is a sobering reality. And so I encourage every parent to get a jar similar to this one for every child in your home and to do some calculations to figure out how many weeks, how many marbles you have left. And then to get into the routine, get into the rhythm, get in the habit that at the end of every week you take one marble out. Because when you see how much time you have left, when you number your days, you become more intentional with the time that you have left. And I believe that you will gain wisdom as you make decisions with what to do or, again, what not to do with the time that you have left. And so the goal for this series has been to share 6 principles that will help you and I make sure that we make the most of the time that we have left. And way back in week 1, which is a long time ago, we said time over time makes a history worth repeating. It takes time. It takes your time. It takes my time intentionally over time to make a history worth repeating. That you're already making a history in the life of the children in your home or the children in your lives. The question is it a history worth making? Is it a history worth talking about? Is it a history worth repeating? It takes your time over time to make that kind of history, to build that kind of heritage, to leave that kind of legacy. The kind of legacy that you would be proud for one day your children to pass on to their children. It takes your time over time. And then we said in week 2, love over time reflects worth. That as parents, as adults who are present in the lives of the next generation, we have to prove our love over time. And the way that you do that is by being present, both in the predictable and in the random times of life. You prove love by being present and by getting to know your children, by intentionally discovering and in some cases rediscovering the things that make them who and what they are. And as you rediscover who they are, regardless of how good, bad, or ugly it gets, you never, ever, ever walk away. And as you love them in that way over time, as you reflect that kind of unconditional love to them, you are reflecting that they have worth. And it's a worth found not in who they are, not in what they can do or how well they can do what they do. It's a worth that's found simply in who they are. And when you love them that way over time, they learn to love themselves. They learn to love themselves, and then when you say those words, I love you, they have meaning behind them. Because we said that words over time can impact someone's direction. That the words that you choose, the words that I choose to give our children, to give our teenagers, shapes the way they see the world. The words we use shape the way that they see themselves, shapes the way they see God. And like you and I, they make decisions based on what they see. Decisions that will impact the direction that their lives are going to take. Words matter. Your words matter. Especially when you put them together and tell a story. We said last week, stories over time shape someone's perspective. Stories over time shape someone's perspective. And kids and teenagers desperately need grandparents or older influencers in their lives who will give them stories, will give them the relational history they need to give them a healthy perspective as to their identity. And they need fictional stories. They need fictional stories that will give them a cultural history that they need to connect to a wider community, to develop values, and they need stories from the Bible. Kids and teenagers today need Bible stories in their lives to give them the spiritual history that will help them see that they are a part of a much bigger narrative, one where God is the author and they have been invited to play a significant role. Stories shape our emotional, relational, cultural, moral, and spiritual perspectives. And Jesus told stories over and over and over again, time and time and time again, to help us get a glimpse into who God is and to what God is like. He told stories so that we could see ourselves and so we could clarify and discover what really, really matters. And today, as we continue on in this discussion of stories, as we continue talking about being present in the lives of the next generation, as we unpack today's principle, I want to tell a story that Jesus told. It's a story that Jesus told to a group of people who should have gotten it, but for one reason or another, they just didn't get it. As we said last week, stories clarify truth. They clarify truth and they give us perspectives that we don't have. And Jesus told a story to a group of people that just didn't get it, even though they should have. The group of people was a group of people known as the Pharisees. The Pharisees were a group of religious leaders, and they spent way more time than anyone else in the synagogue, in the temple. And they spent way more time studying and jumping in, delving into the scriptures than anyone else. But they failed to see the meaning or the purpose or the point behind it all. The Pharisees were a group of people who they saw the value in the temple, they saw the value in the traditions, but they didn't see the heart of God behind it all. And so one day Jesus confronted them and he told them a story that's a famous story, a story that many of you have heard a number of times before. But like the Pharisees, because they knew the scriptures, they could fail to see the meaning behind it. Sometimes because we know the story, we fail to see the meaning behind it. Because we know how the story goes, we tune out the story before we even get to the end. Because we know the story, we miss the meaning and we fail to get the perspective that Jesus, by telling the story, was meant to give us. So this morning, as we continue on, I want to once again tell a story, a famous story that Jesus told. And hopefully as we tell the story, as we talk about the story, we will discover the principle, the perspective behind the story that Jesus wanted to give this group of people. And it's critical that we get this. It's critical that we get this, not just for the sake of our kids and not just for the sake of our teenagers, but for you and for me as well. The story is one of a father who had two sons, and the youngest son left home prematurely. He took his father's inheritance and he went off and made his way towards the far world, the far country. He wanted to make his own mark on the world. He wanted to find new friends. He wanted to sow some wild oats. He wanted to kind of leave his stamp and make a name for himself. But after a series of bad decisions and probably the fact that he never went to any of Dave Ramsey's financial courses, he lost everything that he had. He lost everything that he had, and then he ended up working on a dingy shawarma place on the east end of town. And to make matters worse, he had to live with the pigs out back. And he ended up getting to the place, and many of you know the story. You know that he got to a place in his journey where he kind of threw his hands up in the air and he'd had enough, and he said, I just want to go home. Sounds like a Michael Bublé song, right? I just want to go home. I don't know if you know that song or not. Any Michael Bublé fans in the house? Keep your hands down. You don't want to confess that in here. Anyways, it's great. So we know the story goes, he kind of had enough. He wanted to go home, and so he left the pigs, he left the shawarma place, and he made his way back home. And in my mind, I envisioned Jesus telling the story, and I'm sure like them, my mind wanders, and I imagine this man, broken and defeated, walking through field after field after field, making his way back home. And he finally gets to the edge of that last field, and he's making that final journey, and he sees in the distance the big white house that he grew up in. It doesn't say it was a big white house. I just envision in my mind that it's a big white house, and so he sees this big white house in the distance, and he takes a deep breath as he's making his way. You can see it, and it's getting closer and closer. And the reality that he's about to face his father, who he walked away from, gets closer and closer and closer. What he doesn't realize is that even though he can see the house, his father can see him because his father has been waiting for him. His father's been looking for him. His father's been expecting him, hoping, praying that he would return home. And when he sees his son in the distance, he doesn't wait for him to arrive. He runs off in pursuit of him. And as he gets closer, I'm sure that the son could barely hold back the tears. My guess is he could not hold back the tears. He cried, and his father reaches out to him and embraces him and holds him close and squeezes him, and tears are running down both of their eyes, and I love yous and I'm sorry's are just echoing in this field where only two men are standing. And together they walk back towards the big white house, and the father is just elated. The dream has come true. His son is home, and he calls out to his servants. Wouldn't that be nice? His father said to the servants, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf that we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast." Why? "For this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found." Translated, my son lost his way, and now he's back where he belongs. This story, you know it. My guess is most everybody in this room knows this story. But this story is rich with perspective. This story is incredibly rich with perspective. Perspective into who God is and what God is like. Perspective into you and what you're like. And perspective into me and what I'm like in my life. So much perspective is found in this story, we could spend an entire series. My guess is one day we will spend an entire series talking about it. And even after an entire series, we still won't get the fullness of perspective that's in this story. But for our remaining time together this morning, I just want to focus on one small perspective, but one powerful principle that's found in this story. It would be easy for us to read over this story and tell this story really quickly and miss the meaning that's in this story. It's simply this: tribes over time show us that we belong. Tribes over time show you, show me, show us, show our kids and our teenagers that we belong. That we belong. We all know what it feels like, that moment. It's happened to everybody, I'm sure, in different ways and at different times in your life. That feeling when you walk into a room full of strangers. That time when you walk through the cafeteria with your tray looking around for a seat. That time where you wear a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey to an Ottawa Senators home game and you just walk in and you realize, I don't belong here, right? That moment where you just look in and you say, these aren't my friends. This isn't my family. This isn't my tribe. There's something in you that it becomes very clear, it becomes very obvious. I don't belong here. We've all felt that at different times and in different ways in our lives. And those feelings aren't that damaging when they just come and go here and there. We're kind of optimistic people. We're hopeful people. We're realistic people. And we think if I just keep walking, if I just keep moving, if I just keep making my way through the crowd, eventually I'll find a seat. Eventually, I'll find some friends. Eventually, I'll find where I belong and where I fit. But if those feelings fester, if you have that sense where you don't belong long enough, it can be damaging. If the loneliness lingers, and if the isolation is frequent, and if the rejection is recurrent, it's crippling. If you grow up without a tribe, there are complications that come with that. And the complications of not belonging can seriously impair the future of a child. Someone who's way smarter than me said this. Gregory Walton is a professor at Stanford University. He said, isolation, loneliness, and low social status can harm a person's subjective sense of well-being, as well as his or her intellectual achievement, immune function, and health. Just to dummy it down for the rest of us, I think he's saying people need people. People need people. You need people. And I need people. We need people. And being in a room like this full of people is great and wonderful, but it's not enough. Sitting shoulder to shoulder and staring forward and getting information spoken to you is great and it's helpful. Hopefully, I believe there's purpose and there's meaning and value behind it, but it can't stop here for any one of us. We have to move from these rows into circles of 6, 8, 10, 12 people, where we turn from shoulder to shoulder and we turn inwards and we look across the room at one another and we build and develop community with one another. And we develop bonds with one another. And we develop a relationship with one another and history with one another and trust with one another. Everybody needs a circle. Everybody needs a circle, and every kid needs a tribe. What's a tribe? It's a great question. Glad you asked. A tribe is simply a group of people that are connected by something that they have in common. Could be anything from ancestry to ideas to experiences. Could be politics, theology, sports, right? We the North, right? I mean, it could be any one of those things. But tribes are this, this interesting thing, and we all do something when it comes to tribes that we probably don't realize we do. Have you ever done that? You do something, you don't even know you do it. When it comes to tribes, every single one of us defines ourselves by the tribes that we belong to. And we don't even realize we do. We say things like this: I am a musician, foodie, atheist, Baptist, conservative, reader, feminist, mom, artist, Sens fan, student, blogger, photographer, biker, pirate. Ran out of things at the end there. I'm just kind of making stuff up. Not too sure there are too many pirate gangs running around these days. But the point is simple. We define ourselves by the tribes that we're in. And we communicate to other people to see what we have in common and if we belong to the same tribes. Tribes are an interesting thing. They matter. They're powerful. When it comes to tribes, they're this thing that connect us to a variety of different people. It's essentially how humans find other humans. Tribes provide for us circles that we can move in and out of as we discover who we are and what our purpose is and where we belong. Jane Howard is an English novelist, and she said this about tribes: call it a clan, call it a network, call it a tribe, call it a family, whatever you call it, whoever you are, you need one. You need one. And I need one. And our kids need one. Tribes are powerful, and they matter. And when it comes to tribes, there are two tribes that you and I have the opportunity, the potential to provide and impart in the lives of the next generation. And they're simply these: the family and the church. You and I have the opportunity to provide these two powerful tribes to the next generation: the family and the church. Just like love, words, and stories were God's idea, I believe that tribes were God's idea as well. I mean, if you think back to the creation narrative that we talked about a couple weeks ago, interestingly, in the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, it says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then he went on from there, and he created everything that's on land and everything that's underwater, and he created all the animals that roam the world. And then he created man. He created Adam. And then he realized that it's not good for man to be alone. And every man in here says amen to that. We're just not good at it, right? If we're just alone to ourselves, bad things happen. So God said, look, I'm going to give you Eve. And so out of man, he created Eve. And then a whole bunch of other people started showing up. And it's not that hard to figure out how that happened. But the point is that people were always a part of God's plan. People were always a part of God's plan. But not only did Adam and Eve bring other people into the world, the sad reality is they also brought sin into the world. They brought sin into the world. They sinned against God. They rebelled against God. They chose to violate the parameters that God had established for their protection. And as a result, sin, the nature of sin, entered the world, entered mankind. Every man, woman, boy, and girl from that moment on and to this day today has a sin nature because of that choices that Adam and Eve made. And so when God unveiled his plan to redeem and restore creation, it began with a tribe, 12 tribes to be exact. And through those 12 tribes that gathered together, they had their own customs, they had their own distinctives, their own value, their own theology. And out of those tribes, God established a nation. And he set that nation apart. And through that nation, he sent his one and only Son to you and to me. And to the next generation, he sent Jesus through that nation. And then something really interesting started to happen. Ecclesias, small tribes of people began to pop up all over the Mediterranean. And they had their own values, and they had their own distinctives. They met together. They ate together. They prayed together. And the book of Acts in the New Testament documents the history of the early church. And in the book of Acts, it talks about these tribes, and it says this: all the believers met together in one place, and they shared everything that they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day. They met in homes for the Lord's Supper and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, and all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. And then Paul, the godfather of the early church, began to write letters to these small tribes to connect them with each other. And he began to show them the things that they had in common through his writings. And through his writings, he helped them navigate similar situations. He wrote down for them values, customs, beliefs, traditions. He gave them information to help them as they tried to bring together all these tribes to realize they were a bigger tribe collectively. A tribe that had in common their hope, their belief, their confidence, and their trust in the death and resurrection of Jesus. And the word began to spread, and the tribe continued to grow. You see, God wired us to naturally connect in tribes, and then he used tribes over time to reveal himself and spread his message of love. And get this, you are sitting in that nice blue chair today because of a tribe that began generations ago. That the movement that began through the tribe that God established has continued on, and we are here today because we are a part of a bigger narrative, and you have been invited, and I have been invited, and the next generation is invited to play a significant role. If you haven't caught it yet, if you haven't seen it yet, it's quite simple. Tribes matter. Tribes matter. And Jesus knew it, and he tried to help the Pharisees see it through the story that he told them, the story of a father who said, "My son who lost his way is now back where he belongs." And then the father, as we saw just a few moments ago in the story that we read, the father did something interesting, simple, but profound and powerful. He gave his son a ring. He gave his son a ring to show him that he was still a part of the family. And he threw a party to assure him and remind everybody else that attended, that was there, that regardless of what he had done in his past, this was still a community to which he belonged. He had a clear message, Jesus did, that he told that day. He had a clear message. There is still a seat for you at this table. This is a place where you are known. This is a place where you are welcome, where you are accepted, where you are forgiven. This is a place that you belong. And only tribes can do that. And I believe the two tribes that God strategically placed in our lives to reflect that sense of belonging are your family and our church. I believe that God gave us your family and our church to reflect that kind of belonging. Kids and teenagers today desperately need parents. They desperately need adults who are going to know them, welcome them, and forgive them over time in such a way that they will know they belong. And if we fail to do that, if you fail to do that, if I fail to do that, the next generation will grow up being just like you and just like me. They're going to grow up living in fear of telling anyone or reflecting to anybody who they really are. That they're going to grow up scared to death. That they won't share with anyone what's really going on with them, what's going on around them, what's going on in them. That they'll be terrified to confess. They will never have the courage to confess what's really happened or what they've really done in their lives because they believe that if they did that, you believe it and I believe it, if we really did that, we would be forgotten. We would be cast aside. We would be left alone. We would be isolated. There would never be anyone waiting at the edge of the field for us. Church, tribe, we cannot let the next generation grow up living in that kind of fear. The kind of fear that you live in and the kind of fear that I live in. Because that fear is debilitating, it's crippling, it's isolating, and it's so destructive. But I believe that there are many of you in this room this morning that are living with that kind of fear. You're living in that kind of fear. Why? Because you never experienced that sense of belonging when you were a kid. Your sense of belonging had everything to do with what you could do and how well you did it, not in who you are, and you never experienced forgiveness. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned a quote from an education reformer named Jeffrey Canada. He's located in the South Bronx of New York, and he runs an organization there. And he said this. He said, the reason that so many of these kids don't believe in God is because they've never seen adults who are God-like. And he goes on to say in that same article that every child, every teenager needs a certain level of failure in their life. And the reason that they need a certain level of failure is so that they can discover and realize and believe that they can move beyond their failure, that they can move past their mistakes, that they can move beyond their shortcomings. And more than just that, he goes on to say that every child needs to know that they can be forgiven by the people who know them most. That every child needs to know that they can be forgiven both by their parents and other adults in their lives who know them. And he goes on to say in that article that he believes that the church is the best equipped organization on the planet Earth to instill that kind of belonging in the life of a kid, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. Because the church is a group of faith-based people who understand that our belonging is rooted in grace. Your belonging and my belonging to this tribe is rooted in grace. So he goes on in this article and he says that every child, every teenager needs to be known, welcomed, accepted, and loved by a group of people who know them best. And here's the truth. You want to belong like that. I want to belong like that. I want to be a part of a tribe that instills in me a sense of belonging that says, even though my past may be marred with failure, there's still a group of people to which I belong and who believe in me, believe in what's ahead of me, and believe more than I do for me. And you and I need to build and instill that sense of belonging in the life of the next generation. That's what makes who we are. That's what makes our Christian, heritage. That's what makes it what it is. It's the fact that our sense of belonging, our idea of belonging, is rooted in grace. True belonging is rooted in grace. The grace that prodigal son experienced through his father. The grace that you and I experience through our Heavenly Father. Grace says that you don't belong because you deserve to belong. You belong because you have been accepted and forgiven by a Heavenly Father who knows you better than you know yourself. A Heavenly Father who knows every thought, every desire, every action that you've ever done or ever had in your life. And despite all of that, He still invites you and accepts you to be a part of His tribe forever. That's belonging. And that's what you have been invited to, and that's what I have been invited to, and that's what we have to model and reflect to the lives of the next generation. The next generation needs parents, they needs adults like you and I, who will introduce them to the grace of God when they're young. And that's why this series is so important. And that's why throughout this series, I've been saying that this series isn't just for parents, it's for every single one of us. And our goal as a church is to give you tools that will help you build the tribe under your roof. That it will be a tribe that's, defined by love and grace and acceptance and godliness. But we also need you to help build this tribe. Whether you're single, whether you're married with no kids, married with kids, whether your kids are grown and gone, every single one of us has the opportunity, and I believe the responsibility to show the children and teens under this roof that they belong to this tribe. They belong to this tribe. We need you to do that. We need you to do that. Your decision to make a difference, to make an impact, your decision to be present in the lives of a few kids or a few teenagers week after week after week will do more for their sense of belonging than anything else that you could do. And so I want to encourage you to consider talking to Lisa about getting involved in our Bridge Kids ministry. It is a ministry. It is not babysitting while the parents go to church. But there is incredible ministry happening just down the hall where there are adults and students who week after week and after week are making an imprint on the lives of the children that are part of this tribe. You could do that. You could do that. Don't wait for somebody else to sign their name on that sign-up sheet. It's so much more powerful than that. It's an opportunity to make a difference in the life of a child, and you have that. Or maybe consider talking to Chris or Tyler in July about our remixed student ministry, about investing in the lives of teenagers, because when you look back at your life, your greatest regrets happened in your teen years. What you could do with your time over time could help a student realize what they can't find at school, that they belong, that they are known, they are welcomed, and they belong to this tribe, a tribe that's eternal. It's eternal. It's amazing. You can make the decision to be there week after week after week, waiting. Waiting. And as you do that, you reflect a heavenly Father who is waiting. And so when they show up broken, lonely, and wounded, they'll find you. They'll see you. And they'll see grace. And because they see grace, they'll know they belong. They belong. The reality is for all of us, whether you have children or not, you have an opportunity. But the reality is time is running out. Time is running out. The reality is every single one of us, we are losing our marbles. So it's time that as a tribe, we make them count. Let's make them count.